Florida's most notorious criminals. It's human nature to be fascinated with the dark underbelly of the world. We're naturally compelled to try to understand the motivation and thought process of minds that function differently than ours. We're captivated by how some situations can spiral out of control until they're bigger than anyone can imagine. Psychologists speculate that humans' morbid curiosity stems from an attempt at self-reassurance, that we're subconsciously looking to better understand the situation so that we can gather clues about how to avoid a similar fate, reassuring ourselves that we are safer because of it. And so, when news of high-profile criminals hits the general public, there's always interest surrounding them. Maybe it's the detail of their horrible crime. In some cases, maybe the public actually relates to the motives of the criminal, like rooting on an everyday man turned to a bandit and robbing banks. Regardless of what attracts the attention, it's hard to deny that some criminals lodge themselves inside of our brains. And Florida is no exception. The state has had plenty of criminals captivate the attention of the state's residents. Before we begin, make sure you like the video and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Now, here are some of the most notorious criminals in Florida's history. At the start, with number 7, we have John, King of the Everglades, Ashley. Before Florida was known as the Wild West of the social media age, thanks in part to the exploits of innumerable Florida man crimes, it really was a little bit like the Wild West. The Everglades, a wetland area around the southernmost tip of the state, was infamous for providing shelter to numerous high-profile criminals in the early 20th century. But none were as prolific or as successful as John Ashley. Self-declared the King of the Everglades, Ashley had a long list of titles: outlaw, bank robber, bootlegger, and even occasionally pirate. During a 9-year period starting in 1915, Ashley's gang terrorized Florida and amassed a stolen fortune of just over $1 million. That's just under $15 million in 2020. Though Ashley was notorious and hated by the local law enforcement, he was considered a folk hero to the locals, who believed he was a symbol of resistance against industrialization, big banks, and wealthy real estate moguls. Ashley's reign of terror became so encompassing, it's said that during a short period in the 1920s, every crime in South Florida was immediately attributed to his gang. Unfortunately for Ashley, no good thing goes on forever. In 1924, on the heels of a personal feud with Palm Beach County Sheriff George Baker, Ashley found himself in the middle of an ambush by Baker and several deputized citizens. After becoming surrounded, Ashley was shot and killed. There are several theories surrounding his death. Some say Ashley pulled a concealed weapon, while others claim he was executed while handcuffed. While we may never know the truth, John Ashley's legacy will forever remain in the Everglades. Number 6, we have Stephen the Old Man Bandit Goss. Whoever said that crime is a young man's profession has never met Stephen Goss. Uncreatively nicknamed the Old Man Bandit, the 56-year-old man is thought to have robbed over 40 banks in his lifetime. Goss started his life peacefully enough, born to a middle-class family in Maryland. However, he robbed his first bank at the age of 20 in 1976. He was arrested a year later, but did little jail time. It wasn't until 1990 that Goss would serve any real prison time. After being nabbed by police in December of 1990, he was accused of robbing over 20 banks, and was eventually found guilty for 8 of them. Goss served 8 years in prison, and once he was released, believed himself to be reformed. He found a job in floral sales and started a family. For 10 years, Goss did not commit another robbery, but in 2008, he lost his job and developed a substance addiction. With his financial woes growing and his desperation increasing, Goss turned back to his special talent, bank heists. Over the course of a year, Goss robbed 21 banks, earning over $130,000. When he was finally caught in February of 2009, he was sentenced to 13 years in prison, which means his release is scheduled for June of 2021. Watch out, Bank of America. At number 5, we have Raynel Valdez. When you think of a gold heist, you probably imagine masked men breaking into Fort Knox and carting off bricks of solid gold. And while that makes for a good movie plot, it's not nearly as strange as the actual events that took place on October 12th of 2012. That morning, George Vilgas was transporting 2 briefcases containing precious cargo, 110 pounds of pure gold flakes. While on the way to his family's business with the gold, he was approached by 3 men, armed with weapons. They forcibly removed the suitcases from Vilgas's possession and fled. All in all, the gold was worth $2.6 million. While 2 of the 3 men successfully escaped by authorities and identified by Vilgas. But Valdez's saga doesn't end there. While awaiting trial, he was released on a whopping $750,000 bail. But as soon as he was released, he vanished, turning himself into a fugitive of the law. After 1 month on the run, Valdez was found trying to illegally enter Belize. Belizean authorities discovered Valdez's identity and returned him to America. In 2017, after years of delay, Valdez was sentenced to 10 years in prison. The worst part? The gold was never found, and authorities suggest it was quickly sold off for a fraction of its value. At number 4, there's Philip Noel Johnson, bank robber. Imagine opening up a storage shed and staring at a gold pile of cash, over $18 million in small bills. That's the sight that greeted FBI agents in 1997. After a series of events allowed them to apprehend Philip Noel Johnson, the man responsible for the biggest heist in history at that time. In March of 1997, Johnson was working as an armed guard for Loomis and Fargo's armored truck. Suddenly, his partners found themselves attacked and overpowered by Johnson. The man bound and left them in different locations, one handcuffed to a tree, the other to a pipe in Johnson's house. Though authorities believed Johnson to be an amateur, they later found evidence that indicated he's been carefully planning this heist for years. Immediately after the robbery, Johnson vanished. In August of the same year, a U.S. Custom found Johnson trying to board a passenger bus and cross into Mexico using an alias. Unfortunately for Johnson, he was identified and taken into police custody. At the same time, police were following an independent investigation that led them to a storage shed in North Carolina. Upon opening, they found Johnson had stashed the money inside, and almost all of the original $18 million was recovered. Johnson was quickly tried and found guilty of the robbery, for which he was sentenced to 25 years in prison. However, he was released in late 2019. At number 3, we have Ted Bundy. If there was a poster boy for serial killers, it would probably be Ted Bundy. When he was finally exposed for the murders of 30 young women across the states of America, this information reshaped the way the public viewed serial killers. Long thought of as creepy social outcasts who existed on the fringe of society, Bundy proved that serial killers could blend right into suburban neighborhoods. Bundy was charming, composed, and thought of as traditionally handsome. He subverted every expectation one would have about a homicidal maniac. Though Bundy was not born in Florida, nor did he begin his crime spree there, it is where he would be caught, imprisoned, and ultimately executed. After his arrest in 1975, Bundy spent 2 years in jail awaiting his trial. In 1997, Bundy took an advantage of a lull in security to jump through the library window and escape through the courthouse he was being supervised in. After fleeing the state, he traveled to Florida and settled outside of the Florida State University campus. Though Bundy claims he initially intended to live the remainder of his life in hiding and refraining from criminal activity, he would soon commit one of his most famous crimes. In 1978, Bundy broke into the Chi Omega sorority house. There, he attacked a group of students, killing 2 and severely injuring another 2. He fled the scene and drove around Florida. In the process, he killed at least 1 other girl. He was finally apprehended on February 12, 1978. Ultimately, Bundy was sentenced to death and was executed at Florida State Prison in 1989. At number 2, we have Casey Anthony. Casey Anthony is one of the more surprising entries on this list, because while she is a criminal, chances are she was not convicted for the reasons you believe. In 2008, Casey's 3-year-old daughter Kaylee was reported missing in Orlando, Florida. The report was made by the girl's grandmother, who said she had not seen the child in 31 days, and suspected Casey, her own daughter, of foul play. 5 months after the report had been filed, Casey's remains were tragically found in the woods near the Anthony household. Casey Anthony was the prime suspect and was charged with first-degree murder, initiating a trial that would receive massive national news coverage. The case was well known, and Casey Anthony became a household name. Though there was compelling evidence that indicated Casey Anthony was responsible for the passing of her daughter, the government could not conclusively determine the cause of Kaylee's death, a piece of evidence that was the main focal point of Casey's defense team. After an intense 6-week trial in which the prosecution sought the death penalty, Anthony was found not guilty of murder, but guilty of 4 misdemeanor charges for providing law officers with false information. The verdict was met with massive public outrage, with Time eventually describing the case as the social media trial of the century. Casey Anthony was ultimately sentenced to 1 year in county jail. Her time in prison during the trial was considered time served, and Anthony was released on the same day of the verdict. And at number 1, we have Pablo Escobar. Pablo Escobar is a unique addition to this list. Though he's not from Florida and only lived in Miami for a short period of time during the 80s, his criminal empire and influence greatly shaped Miami culture for the better part of a decade. Considered as one of the most successful cartel leaders in history, Escobar was responsible for the majority of the cocaine trade in the United States throughout the 80s and the 90s. Escobar is the wealthiest criminal to have ever lived, amassing over $30 billion by the time of his death. Escobar's drug distribution channels in South Florida were responsible for moving a vast majority of his drugs, turning Miami into one of the cocaine capitals of the world. Escobar even went as far as to purchase a home on Miami Beach, but only got to enjoy the mansion for a few years before it was seized by authorities. Ultimately, Escobar was able to run his multi-billion-dollar drug empire for years, until his arrest in 1991. After making a daring escape from prison in 1992, Escobar fled and hid from authorities for the remainder of his life. In total, Escobar survived for 16 months on the run before being killed by Colombian police. So did any of these entries surprise you? Let me know in the comments section. And before you leave, don't forget to click the like button and subscribe to our channel.